Welcome to the Flex Rental Solutions webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the warehouse process more in terms of manifests and returning gear. This is part of our Back to Basics series. Last week we did pull sheets and prepping gear. So this week we just want to finish that warehouse process discussion by talking about manifests and returning gear. We're also going to be talking about free scanning in. We'll look at how that works and a few of the principles behind that. So let's just go back to the job that we were working on last week. And just as a quick review, we started with a quote. And then from a quote, of course, we used the workflow to create a pull sheet. We talked about some of the principles behind how a pull sheet and quote are related and how availability will work and things like that. And then once we started scanning gear on the pull sheet, of course, remember we went to the prep screen, we scanned gear, and then we finalized the pull sheet, and that gave us a manifest. The manifest is just going to be a list of everything that was scanned during the prep process. And if you recall from last week, this will include everything that we scanned that was on the pull sheet, but it also might include some things that weren't on the pull sheet that we scanned anyway. Because remember, Flex will let us scan things that aren't on the pull sheet. It gives us a prompt that will say something like, this item's not on the list, but it's available, or this item's not on the list, and it might create a conflict with another job. But you can scan whatever you want to a job, whether or not it's on the pull sheet. So that's why the manifest might have some gear that is not necessarily on the pull sheet. I gave a little bit of a sneak preview about manifest reports, but that's where I want to start today. Let's look at some of these reports that we can print. First of all, I want to show you how you can enable additional reports if you're interested in that. Because when you go into a manifest, you might not see as many reports off to the side as I have in my system. So if you want to enable more, first you're going to go to the Projects menu, click Project Elements. And since we're dealing with a manifest, we'll double-click Manifest. And if you've never been here before, this is just where all of the different settings are for each of your elements. So quotes, pull sheets, manifests, crew calls, etc. all have dozens, if not hundreds of different settings that you can manage. Specifically, we're just looking at reports. So we'll click the Reports tab. And then this is showing us these instance level reports. These are the ones that are enabled and will show when you open a specific manifest. So anything that I have a check next to, that will be available to me when I have a manifest open. And I think I've done most of them that are related to manifests. See, most of these are pull sheet. But most anything that is a manifest type report, I already have enabled, and I just make sure that the checkbox is checked and then click Update. So if you want to enable or disable any manifest reports, then you could just do that here on this screen. Let's look at a few though, some of them that are the most useful. If you just print, or if you click Generate PDF, by default it will print the default equipment list. We'll talk about it maybe in another webinar, or you can view our YouTube page about reports, or our video about reports, where you can change what this Generate PDF does. We're not going to talk about that now though. But it would, by default, just print this, what we call the default equipment list. So if I print that now, let's just see what it looks like. So this is a basic manifest report, just the default equipment list. It's basically going to show us all the information almost exactly as it's laid out here in the actual manifest in Flex. But you might be asking yourself, well, I would like to know a little bit more about this inventory, like specific barcodes, maybe even weights, even country of manufacture, because I know a lot of you might be shipping gear and will need some sort of manifest that shows all that information if you're maybe crossing borders or weighing the trucks, things like that. So that's why we have other options that you can enable that will give you a lot of that information. So for example, if I print the shipping manifest, Let's see what that looks like. It's going to be a little bit of a different look and have some different information than just the default equipment list. Expand that just a little bit. So obviously it looks a little bit different. The header block looks a bit different than the default list. But then also look at the body of this manifest. It's showing us not only quantity and descriptions, but if these items had stencils, it would show that, the actual barcodes, serial numbers, country of manufacture, if I put that information in, and then the weight, extended weight, I should say. So for example, these are serialized items, so there's only going to be a quantity of 1 for each, and the weight for each is just 45. But if I have like a non-serialized that has a quantity of 2 or 8, then it would show the extended weight. So it would take 8 of these and whatever weight I entered into this inventory item. Remember, a lot of this has to do with the way that you set up your inventory. We talked about that a few weeks ago in the webinar about inventory. That every inventory item that you create, you can put a weight into that. In fact, let's go to our projectors. Maybe look at this barcode 20K. And when you go to edit the inventory model, you have this weight field. So you're going to want to fill that out for your inventory if you want that information to appear on a report like we did here, where we printed this out and got the weights over here. I always like to show people this though. Instead of having to open every single inventory item, then go click edit, then come edit, then click update, you could always use what we call the catalog worksheet. So just click inventory, then click catalog worksheet. And what this does is show you all of your inventory models, and then you can scroll over and enter weights. It's a lot like a spreadsheet where you just enter it, and then once you click out of the field, it saves that information. So that's just a much faster way to do that. But I always say this, when we're printing manifests, the information that you get on a manifest depends on what you put into Flex in the first place. So that's why I always say when you're creating inventory, fill out as much of that information as possible, because you might get to a point where you're going to really want that information on a manifest. Let's look at a few other of these manifests. We have the container report. We didn't necessarily scan any containers on this manifest. But if you have items that are set up as a container, meaning that they have items inside of them, then when you print that container report, it's going to show you a separate page showing what the container is and what's inside of it. Just to show you what that looks like, let's go find an older manifest in my system that I probably have some cases and containers scanned out. So for example, I have an A case with one item in there, some speaker cases with items inside. So if I go and print the container report or the inside container report or outside container report, they all kind of give us the same information. They're all just formatted a little bit differently. But let's print the container report. And that's going to show us, and I don't remember exactly what this one looks like. Let's wait for it to go. Here we go. So this one actually will split the page. So you could cut that in half and it's going to show the case. It's going to show the items inside of it. So you could print that out and then cut these in half and put these on the actual cases so it's easier for somebody on the show site to see what's actually inside of there. So we're not going to go through all of these. I just recommend that you enable as many of these as many of these reports as you want and try them out, see what they look like, and see if they would be useful to you. Let's actually start talking about the return process now. Before we even get to returning items, I want to show you a couple of different principles that have to do with the dates of the manifest. So obviously we're, what is today, the 19th, and this return date is the 15th. There's a really important thing that happens in Flex when you pass the date of a manifest and it hasn't been returned yet, and I want to make sure everybody understands that. Let's pick on our JBL Eon 15 speakers. So I'm going to go find that in my inventory. And what I want to do is look at the schedule. Because Flex does something when the manifest date has passed. What that does is it now considers whatever items were on that manifest, it considers them to be out indefinitely. So if we look at the future, it's always going to show me 4 out of 8 because I have 4 on that manifest that is facing a pending return. And once we're late, once we pass that due back return date, Flex is basically going to consider those items potentially missing. And so for the indefinite future, it's going to show those items short. So we get this question kind of frequently in our support channels when a manifest date passes and people don't realize that, and then all of a sudden all of their future quotes start getting a ton of conflicts. That's usually one of the number one causes of that, is that your manifest date has passed and you might have hundreds if not thousands of items on that manifest that are now considered missing essentially, and will show in the schedule as not available. There's a really easy and quick fix for that. If you get to the point where you haven't scanned something in by its return date, really all you have to do is just change the return date on the manifest. So I'm going to change the return date to tomorrow because I know I could probably get these scanned in by today. So I'll say tomorrow by 7 p.m. is when I officially expect them to return now. And look at what happens now when I look at the schedule. After tomorrow, my schedule goes back up to 8 out of 8 because Flex recognizes that date in the future now. Oops, didn't mean to click that. I'll go back to my month view. But it recognizes that I have set that as the return date now, so it expects those items to return after that date. But again, if I go back to a date in the past and reload my calendar, then Flex considers those items to be not returned indefinitely. So that's a really important thing to realize, and you might come across that if you haven't returned your items before the actual return date. So what a lot of our customers do is actually just pad the return date all the way starting from their quote. So when they start a quote, they might say, yes, the job ends on the 15th, and we might get it back that night, but I also know that we have a lot going on. So maybe I'm going to say the return date is actually the 17th or the 18th because I know we might not be able to get those items scanned back in until that time. So you might just pad that by a couple days from the quote, but you always have that option where if some unforeseen circumstances come up and you're not able to return those items, you can just go to the manifest and change that date. So again, let's go back and just say that I want that return date to be tomorrow. But I'm actually going to start returning these items now. And once you've returned the items, Flex doesn't care about the manifest return date. When you've scanned an item in, this return date could be the 15th, it could be the 25th, it doesn't matter. Once you've scanned it in, the scan takes precedence over the return date of the manifest. So when I scan these JBL speakers in, then Flex just considers them back in my inventory regardless of what the date is. So let's actually go and complete that process. Well, actually, before we do that, I just want to bring up a couple things. Number one, never delete something off of a manifest. So what I mean by that is don't come over here on the actual manifest, click an item, and then say delete selected lines. If there's something that actually didn't go on that job, maybe if it got scanned, and then you decided you're not actually sending it, or it got scanned on accident, never actually got sent out, don't delete it from the manifest. I always recommend going back to your pull sheet, and we'd have to go to the prep screen and find the related scan records and undo the prep scan. Either that, or from your manifest, just go to the return screen and actually return that item. But actually deleting it from the manifest is going to cause you some problems. So I don't recommend doing that. And furthermore, I don't ever recommend just fully deleting a manifest, because once you've scanned things out, that's when a manifest gets created. And those items are going to need either an undo or a return scan before they can be returned back into inventory. So just deleting a manifest doesn't do anything. It's the scan that puts those items out. So don't delete an entire manifest either. If you need to get things off a manifest, either undo it from the pull sheet or just return them. That won't take them off the manifest, but it will at least return them back into your inventory. Let's actually go to the return screen now. So I'm on my manifest, and then I click Go to Return Screen. You could also do this a little more quickly if you go to the Warehouse menu, click Return Manifest, and then once you see the manifest that needs to be returned, just double click, and it brings you right to the return screen. The return screen is a lot like our prep screen. Looks very similar. Except now it's showing me the actual units that got scanned out for serialized items, instead of like on a prep screen where it just shows generic quantities and starts checking those off. Now it's actually showing me each individual barcode. And from here, it's just like on the prep screen where I can either go and start scanning items with my barcode scanner that's been properly set up for use with Flex, or I could start hand typing in barcodes, or I could double click the items to do a virtual scan. And again, there's a permission associated with that, whether or not you can virtually scan serialized items. I have that enabled in my system just because I like to do it for training purposes, but I know a lot of you probably want that to be denied to most users because you don't want them to be lazy and just double click an item to return it. You want them to actually scan the item, verify that it actually returned, scan it with a barcode scanner, or hand enter that barcode. So just for demonstrating good practices, let me actually hand type in the barcodes instead of virtually scanning. Let's see, how many of those did I have? 227. Just one. So I'll return one. In fact, I accidentally typed in that barcode that was non-serialized. For non-serialized, I would still probably just double-click or use a cheat sheet and scan the barcode, but I just like double-clicking the non-serialized. It does the same exact thing. But for serialized items, again, let's just pretend that I actually have them sitting in front of me, so I would scan or hand enter the barcodes. And everything just gets checked off as I scan it. There are a couple options on here that are administrator level options. So if you scroll all the way down here, you'll see a couple things here. Number one, manually mark line items as returned. This is something that we implemented so that you can get things off of the presumed missing or the unreturned items, not the presumed missing, I'm sorry, but the unreturned items per manifest report. So if you have an unreturned items list that's just hundreds of pages long and you have items on there from 5 years ago, you can open that manifest, check the box and say manually mark it as returned. It's not actually going to return that item. It's just going to give it a check mark on the manifest so that it won't show up on the unreturned items report anymore. And then we also have scan selected items in. This is kind of a cheat way to do something really fast. I could check multiple boxes and then say scan selected items in. It's going to verify. I say I agree, scan items in. And that just scanned everything that I checked. Again, that could be kind of dangerous for just the casual, everyday warehouse user, but we do have that option there. I think it's set up as administrators only can access that. I like to use it, especially when I'm training, but also I know that some people might like to use this where if there's just a really small job that's coming back and they can just look and verify that everything is there, then maybe they would just select all and then scan selected items in. But again, most of the time you're not going to use that because you actually want to go through each item individually. Oops, not running hours. I just want quantity. So I'm just going to return a few more items. And you'll see what happens when I do that. It gives me a timestamp with my initials, the time that it was scanned. And that's actually something you can print on a manifest. I believe it's the internal manifest. Look at what we get when we print that. This is more for internal use, so this isn't something you would send with a truck driver or send to your customer. This is something that we'd print and use for our own internal purposes. This shows me the item, stencil, barcode, serial, and it shows me when it was prepped, who prepped it, and when it was returned. So I can scroll down here. Maybe I'm a warehouse manager and I can print this out and look and see, oh, all this stuff hasn't been returned yet. Maybe I should go talk to whoever in audio to see what the deal is. And also, like I mentioned too, these items would now start showing up on our unreturned items reports. So I could print this one, or even our system-wide report, unreturned items report. This would search for all manifests that have unreturned items and show us anything that hasn't been returned yet. This is just one way to return items too. Let's say that you have 5 shows that just came back at once. They all came and they're just sitting in a giant pile in your warehouse. Maybe you don't want to have to open a tab for each job because stuff from each job is just laying everywhere in the warehouse, and you don't want to have to click between tabs just to return something. Because look at what happens if I try to return something that's not on this manifest. I get the invalid scan because I can't return something that's not on this actual manifest. But we built in this really cool thing. It's called the free scan in. And this actually will help us and let us scan whatever we want, and it would return it to its respective manifest. So let's find a barcode that's actually on this manifest, 00241. I don't have to be on the manifest tab. I could just be in free scan in and just start scanning whatever I find on the warehouse floor. Maybe I'll just type in a random barcode. See, I don't even think that was on that manifest, but maybe it was on another manifest somewhere else, and I'm able to scan it. And look at what happens when I go back to the return screen for a specific manifest and reload. Then you start seeing things checked off that were scanned during that free scan in. So a lot of times what will happen in a warehouse is that the warehouse employees will just go through and do all the actual scanning on a free scan in page. And then either a department manager or warehouse manager would come in and open each manifest and verify what got checked in and what didn't. So let's say that the warehouse says they're done with everything. I'm the warehouse manager. I open this return screen and I see a bunch of stuff missing. I can either go talk to the audio people or the power people and say, hey, what's going on? Why are we missing so much? And they can say nothing, none of that stuff came back, at which point I'd start investigating with the account manager for that job or call the venue and try to figure out where all my stuff is. Look at what happens when I type in or scan barcodes that are non-serialized on the free scan in. Let's do 00363. This will be a power cable. It pops up a list of all of the different manifests that have that non-serialized item, and it tells me how many are on there, how many are pending return. That's the first number. And I can actually return multiple quantities to each manifest, or I could just choose one manifest. I'm working on this job. I'm fairly confident these came back from this job, so I'm going to say I'm returning 6 to the warehouse training. Now that one, I was hoping to find one that had multiple. Let's try maybe 365. Now this one's actually just 2 different line items on the same manifest. So if I want to return everything at once, I don't have to come in and type in the numbers. I could just click the header up here, return quantity. I click that and look what happens. Everything automatically fills in. So if I have just a giant pile of these cables and I count everything that's supposed to be returned, I could just click that header and then click accept, and that returns everything for me. Let's go back to this return manifest screen, reload, and see how we're doing now. Looks like I've got quite a few more items that I returned in that free scan in. I'm just going to quickly return a few more items with virtual scans just for the sake of time. But I'm going to leave a few of these items unreturned. And this is what happens now. If I try to go finalize this, let's say that these just actually didn't return. When I go to finalize, Flex is going to warn me that the items that are not returned will be marked as presumed missing. And in this case, that's good because I actually didn't find these items. They are presumed missing. So when I click finalize, look what happens. If we open up this barcode 0009 of that SM58, and I'll just type in that barcode here, that now shows us this is the last place it was known to be. It's presumed missing, yes, and it would start showing up on my presumed missing items report. The cool thing is, though, is that the second this gets scanned either out to another job or free scanned in, all of that will just be resolved. I don't have to come in and edit the serial number detail. Flex will resolve that immediately. So if I'm on free scan in, and this could be months later, maybe this finally turned up, and I scan that item, it's basically going to resolve its last known location and take the presumed missing tag off. So you don't really have to worry about it. So at some point, if this does get returned and someone free scans it in or scans it to another job, then Flex just takes care of all that for you. So like I said, once you're done and you've finalized, you have a lot of cool options here, like your unreturned items report. We also have additional scanned items, which is a cool one for after you prepped it and you have this manifest. It would look at the manifest and compare it to the pull sheet or to the quote and say, oh, these are all the things that were scanned onto this manifest that weren't on the original. Could be really valuable for the account manager to see how much extra stuff you sent and see if they need to charge for it. Presume missing for this manifest. So there's quite a few reports you can print after the fact. And of course, just like a pull sheet, you can always unfinalize it, do some more work on it. Maybe you got these cables back. And notice too, because I scanned that 009, when I unfinalized it, it refreshed and now shows this as checked back in. And we'll say I got this back too. Now, because I'm 100% complete, Flex will prompt me to finalize. And again, just like with a pull sheet, once I click finalize, it changes the status of that manifest. So see, the manifest used to be in the prep status. And now when I reload it, it's going to be in the return status because I clicked finalize. A couple other things to keep in mind. When you're scanning, always make sure that you are in the correct location. If you have multiple locations in Flex, just always make sure that you are in whatever location that you're scanning. I know some people that have warehouses in the same city sometimes face this problem where they changed warehouses, then they go back to another warehouse and forget to change it back. And we also have sound themes that you can choose. And as of recently, this is now assignable per user. So each user can choose their own sound theme so that they hear their own sounds when they're scanning instead of everyone else having the same exact sound theme. You could look up a YouTube video on our page that will talk about sound themes and sound clips and how you can upload those. And then, of course, just as a reminder, we do have system-wide reports, like for anything that got marked presumed missing, unreturned items reports that will look at all manifests in your system that have unreturned items, and then the reports over here. Also, just like on a prep, if you happen to accidentally return something that you didn't actually see or didn't actually get returned, you can always go to the related scan records, and you have to be unfinalized to do this. Find that return scan and undo it. So that kind of wraps up the warehouse process of our Back to Basics series. We talked about prep last week and then returning and all the principles behind that this week. Next week, we'll probably talk a little bit more about certain things like containers and things like that are still a little bit more warehouse related. And we'll talk about how that will affect your prep and return. If you have any questions about the warehouse process, I always recommend going to forum.flexrentalsolutions.com. We have thousands of users in there, many of whom are just everyday Flex users that are happy to answer questions and give you advice. We also have Flex support that crawls around in there and will sometimes answer questions too. But if you're facing some more technical issues that you need help with, then you can email support@flexrentalsolutions.com.